Welcome to the Quick Start Guide for FFU Builder. We're doing an update today for FFU Builder 2604.1 that includes the new Fluent UI refresh. This Quick Start should be very similar to the previous Quick Start that we recorded back in February. However, the big difference is the user interface change. So you'll notice that it's using the Windows 11 Fluent UI framework that you'll see in a lot of different Windows applications like the Microsoft Store app and various others. Now in this guide, we're going to go through and we're going to install the latest release of Windows 11, 25H2. And we'll also include the latest Windows and .NET cumulative updates, Defender, Edge, OneDrive, the malicious software removal tool, Microsoft 365 apps using the current channel. And we will also be installing the company portal application and some HP drivers. Company portal and the drivers, these are optional. You might not use Intune, so you may not need company portal. And for drivers, these are all going to be independent. Like this is something that's going to be personal to you. So the models that I pick for drivers aren't going to be the same as what you would need. So you can decide which drivers you want or not do drivers at all. Again, you'll notice that we have a video already for this, but it's got the old user interface. For the most part, though, all the content is going to be very similar to what we recorded at that time. Okay, so if this is your first time, you've never used FFU Builder before, follow the prerequisites. You'll need to install Hyper-V. You'll need to install PowerShell 7.6. And also just some things on some recommendations here. If possible, use an unmanaged Windows 11 machine. I personally use Windows 11. You can use Windows Server, but I really highly recommend that you are on an unmanaged machine. What unmanaged means is that it's not managed by Intune, it's not managed by group policy, it's not managed by security software that is pretty heavy-handed. In some cases, things like CrowdStrike and other EDR, AV solutions, they can prevent FFU Builder from running. And a lot of that's due to how DISM operates. There's a lot of DISM work that is done in FFU Builder. And to some tools, that might not look good. It just might detect that something's happening in an automated fashion because we're running PowerShell to automate DISM operations. And depending on which EDR and AV solution you have, the software just might get in the way. You can try and put AV exclusions in. However, in some cases, even exclusions may not even work. So it's best if you can use an unmanaged machine. Totally understandable, though, that you might not be able to do that just depending on your environment, but that's a big recommendation. We also recommend that you have at least 100 gigs of free disk space. FFU files are large. The content that goes into building them is also quite large. So 100 gigs is usually a good sweet spot. If you had 90, that's not a big deal. There's nothing that says you need to have exactly 100 or more, but that's just a good ballpark to shoot for. Again, install Hyper-V, follow the instructions in the link here. Install PowerShell. I recommend using Winget and just run this command here. Do not use the store version. It has some known limitations. I've had some people use that and it's just doesn't operate the same because it's running in the sandbox of the Windows Store. So make sure that you're using the Winget version or the MSI that's out there. Creating the Hyper-V switch now is optional. It used to not be optional, but as of 2604, we have made it optional. So install it if you want. You don't necessarily have to have it. You will need it though if you want to have your VM connected to the internet. In some cases, you might need this. I know with some languages, like language packs, you'll want to be connected to the internet. I think that's our recommendation, is to be connected to the internet to download the language packs while you're building your image. And there's just some software that you do need to connect to the internet for whatever reason. And in the past, we didn't have this capability. In the past, what you would need to do is you'd have to pause the VM, not necessarily pause it, but you would have to make sure that it wasn't installing anything and just make the VM itself like paused so you could go into settings to connect the switch while it was building the FFU. Now we've just basically made it so that there's a checkbox to turn on internet connectivity. So if you need that, you can turn on that experimental checkbox. We'll talk about that here more in a minute. And then you'll need to download the latest release. So just click on that link. That takes you to the releases page. And scroll down to source code, click on the zip, and then open the zip up. Make sure we copy the FFU development folder and then paste it to your C drive. You can put it on another drive if you want. In the guide, we're just putting it under C. And then we want to make sure to unblock any of the files. Because the files aren't signed, we don't have any code signing on any of the files. We can make some improvements to that. But for right now, the files aren't signed. So because of that, they'll be blocked when you download the zip. So we'll need to make sure to unblock those files. So you can go into PowerShell, and then just paste that in, and that'll unblock the files. And then if all works well, then you should be able to run build FFU VM _ UI.ps1, and that will get us FFU Builder's user interface. Now, one thing to note on PowerShell, make sure you're running PowerShell 7.6. Some people get confused about which PowerShell they're in. We have Windows PowerShell and you have PowerShell 7. You want to make sure that you're running PowerShell 7.6. So the best way to do that is just go to your start menu. You should see the PowerShell 7 icon. If you right click on that, run as admin, it should come up and say you're running PowerShell 7.6, which you should have saw earlier from me. Show that 7.6 there. If you're running terminal, then terminal will show the same, but if you ran terminal and it shows up with Windows PowerShell, you'll see this blue icon. So that's how you can tell if you're running Windows PowerShell versus PowerShell 7.6. So just make sure that we're running PowerShell 7.6. If you run Windows PowerShell, things might sort of work, but then you're going to get some errors and other weird things because there's just some things in the code that does not work with PowerShell 5.1, Windows PowerShell 5.1. Okay, and that should do it. So let's get back to the quick start. So Hyper-V settings, we'll go through this quick. I'm not going to enable networking, so I don't need internet connectivity during my build, but if you need that, you can enable it and then use the switch that you built. Disk size, you may want to increase this. 50 gigs works fine with Windows and Office, but if you have really big apps, you might need to increase this. Memory and RAM, RAM and processors, I keep this at 4 and 4. You can do 8. Actually, I think the recommendation for memory is 8, if I remember right. Yeah, it's recommended to use 8 if possible. Honestly, I've found 4 gigs of RAM to be perfectly fine for just installing apps. It hasn't really been a huge issue, but if you have any issues for whatever reason, you can always change these. Keep VM location the same, VM name prefix, just keep those at default. Logical sector size, most people 512 is fine. 4096 is used for 4K disks, 4KN disks, and UFS. If you have UFS disks, I know in the education sector or any sector that's using the old eMMC drives, like those old, they're on lower cost devices. If you have any devices that used to be eMMC, they probably have been moved over to UFS. And if they are UFS, then they're most likely using a logical sector size of 4096. So you need to make sure to set the appropriate logical sector size for the hard disk that you have. For like 95% of people, 512 is probably going to be what you want. Okay, for Windows settings, download the Windows ESD. I recommend everyone do this. For most situations, the Windows ESD is what you're going to want. This is updated every month by Microsoft. In fact, it's updated probably 1 to 2 days after Patch Tuesday. So Patch Tuesday in April came on the 14th. I think on the 16th, I saw the media updated. So it was pretty quick for that media to get updated. However, Microsoft does tend to release out-of-band patches that come after Patch Tuesday. So what you might notice is that if you selected Windows ESD and you downloaded that media, and then maybe a week or two later, you start noticing as you're building additional FFUs that it's downloading the latest cumulative update. It's not downloading the Patch Tuesday update, it's downloading the out-of-band patch that came. So you're getting the latest updates, even more up to date than what's in the current Windows media. So keep that in mind, and just know that the ESD media is actually the most up to date now. It used to not be. You still can also pass your own ISO. And if you're doing like servers, Windows Server, you've got all the different options here. You can pick Windows Server, pass your ISO, pass the server. We don't take a look at your ISO and figure it out for you. That would take too much time because they would have to mount the install WIM and figure out what's inside of that. We're not doing any of that. So you need to, it's your responsibility to pick the correct Windows release. But if you're using server or even LTSB or LTSC, you can pass those as well. And you just want to make sure you're getting the latest ISO from wherever you get your ISOs. Could be VLSC, could be Visual Studio Downloads. Wherever you're getting the latest ISO, just make sure that it's the most up to date, because otherwise the cumulative update, applying the cumulative update can take a while. So we'll take our ESD, just keep everything pretty much the same. If you want to change SKUs, you can change SKUs. You can change the media type, but for the purposes of the quick start, we're just going to keep these all at the defaults. For our updates, we'll keep the updates at default. For our applications, we'll keep, actually, we're going to add the company portal app. If you don't use Intune, then you don't need to do the company portal app. You can pick something else if you want. You can look at Google Chrome or Firefox. But for a lot of customers that I tend to work with, most of them are using Intune, and company portal is something that they tend to deploy from Intune, but we can also just include it right into our FFU. And I want to click on Save App List, or the Winget App List, and we'll save that to our apps folder. And then for Office, we're just going to use the defaults here. This is going to install Office x64 current channel. And in the guide here, we mentioned that it will install Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. So by default, we won't install Outlook. We don't install Access or Publisher. But it'll also download the currently installed language of the operating system because we use macOS. So if you need a different language, then you'll need to modify both XML files. So there's a page here on M365 apps and Office. You'll see that both of the XML files have a language ID of macOS. So if you're using different languages, you'll need to modify those XML files. There's also an option here for you to bring your own Office configuration XML. You can browse to that and use that file. That's just for the deployment of Office. It's not for the download. So if you only provide that file but not the download, but you don't modify the download file, then you might have a language mismatch. So I've seen that happen with a couple different customers where they've mismatched the download XML and their own custom XML, and that got them into a situation where the languages didn't match. So we don't provide you with anything in the user interface right now for the download. I'm going to modify this page in the future to make it easier. So for right now, you can bring your own configuration XML, but you'll need to go and modify the Office file, the download at FFU.xml file. You'll have to modify that manually. All right, so for drivers, the guide is going to have us go and download HP drivers. You can download whatever model you want, doesn't really matter. Or you can skip downloading drivers if you want. But to make sure that we're sticking with what the Quick Start guy says, if we go to the section on drivers, and we're going to pick this HP. Okay. and then we'll save the drivers.json file and make sure to save it into the drivers folder. Okay. And then down here, we want to make sure to select copy drivers to USB. Like 99% of you should be doing this. Install drivers to FFU. This is only used if you are doing single models. Most people do have multiple models. So with multiple models, you don't want to install unnecessary drivers into your FFU. Copy the drivers to the USB drive. We will use there's a driver mapping file that we create, and then we'll use WMI to find the model and then match that to the folder that the drivers are in. So just use copy drivers. If you have a small USB drive, you can compress driver model folder to WIM. That'll make things better. And if you have PE drivers that you need, we can copy PE drivers, and we can use drivers folder as PE driver source. And so what this will do is it'll copy the drivers from your drivers that you have downloaded or that you have copied manually to the drivers folder. We'll look through and we'll recurse through all of the driver folders to find the class IDs that make sense for WinPE. So things like touch and your mouse, your keyboard, those kinds of things. Okay, on the build tab, the first thing I want to talk about is the bits priority. Now I know the Quickstart guide doesn't mention it, I don't think, but bits priority, if you find that downloads are slow, change this to foreground. We default to normal because that's the default behavior of bits, but it's going to make things slow. With foreground, it's going to speed things up considerably. So if you don't have any issues with bandwidth, and if you were to chew up all the bandwidth in your organization and you're fine with that, then set this to foreground. But if you notice that you have some issues with downloads, like maybe you are using up all the bandwidth that's causing performance issues for other users, then you can change your bits priority over to normal. Okay, so the first thing that this has us go through is clicking on the build tab. So if we go into the build tab, or I'm sorry, we're on the build tab. Build USB drive options is the first thing. So for build USB drive options, we want to click on build USB drive. And depending on your situation, you might have USB sticks that are flagged as external hard disk media. And if that's the case, then you'll need to check this box. Now, some USB drives will be flagged as external hard disk. Most will be removable disks. And so for those that are removable disks, you don't need this option. But I have a external drive that I use that's actually an SSD. And that drive is flagged as external hard disk media. So I need to make sure to check this option. Now, for some people, you might have multiple external hard disks connected to your machine. If that's the case, then you most likely want to just select a specific drive that's on your machine. And so if you need to do that, then we can go select specific USB drives and then pick the drive that we want. Then we have copy autopilot, copy provisioning packages, and copy additional FFUs. I'm not going to do any of these. Okay, let's talk about device naming. So device naming, the user interface has changed for this to allow for device naming. In the past, this was all done through an unattended XML file and a prefixes.txt file. And what this allows us to do is we can either prompt for a device name. So a technician will be prompted at the command prompt to type in the name of the device. We can specify a device name. So we can use static text, we can use a %serial % variable, or we can use both of those together, such as comp-serial. Now when you do this, you will need to select, I say you actually don't need to do this at all, but what will automatically happen is it'll choose for you to copy, unattend, or inject if you're using static names. If you're using serial, the serial variable, then it's going to copy unattend.xml. So that actually controls these checkboxes here. So copy unattend, this is what the majority of people should use. And what this is used for is to copy the unattend after the FFU has been laid down to the physical machine. So if you're using USB deployments and you want to set a unique computer name for each machine, then we need to use an unattend file to do that, and we modify the unattend file at build time for that machine. So if we were to do something like comp %serial, then you will see that at build time, we will figure out the serial number of the machine using WMI. We will add that to the comp prefix, the comp dash prefix. So you'll end up with a comp dash, and then if the serial number is 12345, it'd be comp dash 12345. We then take that and we put that in the unattend XML file under the computer name element. So when that gets added to the unattend XML file, when we copy the unattend XML file to the Windows installation that has been laid down with the FFU, we then end up with the appropriate name set. So specify the device name is actually a new option. We didn't use this before. It's been added in 2604.1. Now, what most people are used to is the prefixes, because we've had a prefixes file that you could provide. And so a sample prefixes file is already in the repository. And so here we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. These are just the sample prefixes that were in that text file. And so you can edit this directly in this box. So we can do, whatever we want here. And the serial number will be appended to any of the prefixes that you have here. So what happens with this prefixes file is that when it comes time to deploy, if there's a prefixes file with multiple prefixes, you will get prompted to pick one of the prefixes. If there's only a single prefix, then that's going to function the same as if you were to specify a device name with the prefix and the serial number. So if we had just this and just one prefix, this is pretty much the exact same as this. It would just look like this. This and this are the same. And so you can save your prefixes from here. Let's go back to this so it loads those up. So if you click on save, this will just save the file that you have specified here. So if I were to add under sample prefixes AAA, I save this. Then I'm just going to delete all that text out, so when I go and reload it, you'll see that the AAA should come back, and it does. So that file was overwritten with the change that I made. Okay, and then serial to device name mapping. So this uses a mapping of serial numbers to computer names. This is good for server scenarios or any scenario where you want the serial number of a device to match a specific computer name based on that serial. So you might have some naming convention where you may use a portion of your serial number to create the device name. And so if that's the case, then you would need to use this format. It's important to have this at the top of the file because the apply FFU script at deployment time will read, it actually does require this text at the top. So it should be serial number, comma, computer name, and then your list of serial number and computer name mappings. And just like with that prefixes.txt, this field is editable. So I can do a 101, and that will save to my serial number mapping. And if I delete this and then re-import, we should see that it's there. Okay. And with that, that should be all we would need to do for the quick start. Our drive has been selected. Post-build cleanup is all good. We'll leave that at default for now. So for my device naming, I'm just going to have a prompt. Okay, and we're good to go. Okay, so it's building. And the first thing that it will do is it'll go and download drivers. And this will take some time. depending on what model or models you've chosen. And so I'm going to pause the video. We'll come back. We'll look at things once we get to the virtual machine. For the most part, this is just kind of like watching paint dry, because we're going to download Office, we'll download the drivers, we'll download a whole bunch of things. And then once we get to the VM, then I'll come back and start talking through what the VM is doing. Okay, so the VM's up and running. It's automatically booting into Windows 11. And what we'll notice is the FFU Builder Orchestrator is running through and installing all of our updates. So the first thing is it's installing Defender, and then it's going to go through and install Edge and OneDrive and all the other updates that we had mentioned. But it's not going to install the cumulative update, and it's not going to install .NET, because those have already been serviced into the VHD. So that's already been taken care of. Okay, so we're installing Office now. Now the Office install is going to take some time. This it's basically taking the Office files from here. So this D drive that you see here, this D drive is the apps ISO that it builds, and that ISO gets attached to the VM. And so once the ISO has been attached to the VM, it's got all of our content. So this has Defender, Edge, malicious software removal tool, our company portal app, Office, OneDrive, the orchestration files that we use to do all the installation work, and then our Win32 app. Or there's a folder for Win32, but there's nothing in it. So this Office install will take a while, so we'll come back when that's done. Okay, so it finished installing Office. Then it quickly did MSRT, quickly did OneDrive, and then it installed Edge. And then now it's going through and installing our store app. And in our case, it's just the company portal application. So it's going to install that and the dependencies for the application. And now that the application has installed successfully, we are doing disk cleanup. And once disk cleanup's done, then it should jump into doing Sysprep. Okay, so Sysprep is about to run. It actually does some cleanup of Sysprep, and it does some checking for any UWP apps that may have had a per user installation of them, just to make sure that we've cleaned those out. That prevents those potential issues from causing issues with Sysprep later on. So now we're Sysprepping. So it's going to take a bit of time. We'll pause again and come back when it's done. Okay, Sysprep just finished. And so in a moment, we should see, yep, here it is. So we're seeing the optimization for the VHDX happen, which will happen before the capture. So we just want to make sure that we defrag the partition, clean everything up, so we can get the smallest size for the FFU file. And so this process all takes some time as well. So we'll come back when this is done. Okay, so now we're doing the capture of the FFU. You'll see that we're using the FFU file name of Win1125H2 Pro, and there's the date and time. That all comes from the custom FFU name template that we have here. If you look at the documentation, and if you just hover over and look at the tooltip text, this explains the different variables or the placeholders that you can use to name the VM or name the file. And the capture is now happening, and we parse out the command prompt text from DISM. So that's why you see these like long percentage bars. So I'm just scrolling through this manually to get to the end of that. Okay, so the capture finished, and we dismount the VHDX file, and then we wait a couple minutes to prevent file handle locks. We've seen some issues where FFU Builder's too fast, and we could run into a file handle lock issue that causes some problems. So we have just a 2-minute wait here just to make sure that the file's available. Okay, so the file handle lock is done, or the 2-minute sleep is done, rather. Now we're optimizing the FFU. This optimization is different than what we just talked about. That optimization is just basically consolidating the VHD, getting it ready for capture. This optimization is what allows the FFU to be applied to any size disk, because an FFU is a sector-by-sector copy of a hard disk. If you don't optimize it, then you can only deploy it to a drive that is the same size or larger. When you optimize it, we can now apply it to any disk, whether it's smaller, bigger, doesn't really matter. So we're using the /optimize FFU switch to do the optimization. So this will take some time to do the optimization, and we'll come back when it's done. Okay, so it's done with the optimization, and now we just go through and do cleanup. So we've cleaned up the VHD, and now we're creating our deployment media. And so we'll create our WinPE deployment media that will be copied to the USB drive. And once the PE media is done being created, then we'll create the USB drive, copy this in the FFU file, and any other corresponding artifact files that we need. Okay, so PE was done. Now we're doing drivers. So drivers are one of the artifacts that I had mentioned. And so in this case, we're copying in drivers, and we're truncating some of the folder file paths to make it so that the file paths aren't too long. So you'll see that happening here. Actually, this was for WinPE. These are the drivers for PE, rather. So now that adding those drivers is complete, we're dismounting the PE media, and then we're going to continue on. Okay, so now we're copying the FFU and the WinPE ISO to the USB media. So there is a bug here that says copying multiple FFU files. There's only one. We're not copying multiple. So there's just a logging bug here that needs to be changed. But yeah, we're just copying the files to the USB drive. This process can take a while if you have a slower USB disk. Highly recommend using USB 3 plus, anything fast. If you're using USB 2, it's going to be way too slow. So make sure you're using USB 3. And then we're going to copy our drivers over. That'll take a bit of time. All right, so everything's finished. We've got our USB drive. We've finished in 22 minutes to go end to end, which is pretty good. And if we look at what our USB drives look like, let's pull this over here. So we've got our FFU file, we've got our drivers folder, and we've got our unattend folder. So drivers, this is our HP, here are all the drivers, and then our unattend, this has our unattend file. If I had used prefixes, I should see a prefixes.txt here. If I used the serial mapping CSV file, I should see that file here as well. And then I got my FFU. So now all you need to do is just take this USB drive, plug it into your machine, boot off the USB disk, and then it should start installing the FFU. So with that, that concludes the quick start. If you have any questions, go to the GitHub repo, open up a discussion to answer or to ask any questions. I'm usually answering questions within a day or two. So go ahead and post something there. And let me know how you enjoy the FFU Builder product. You can post a comment to the YouTube channel here or to this video. And if you want to like the video, if it's helped you in any way, that's also welcome by me. And with that, thanks a lot and take care.